Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. Today's discussion is on Starfleet Battles, a fun and interesting example of how starting from one starting point can lead to completely divergent settings that bear no resemblance to each other whatsoever beyond the most superficial levels. I look forward to discussing this with you today, so sit back and enjoy. In 1966, a television series was released called Star Trek. This depicted an optimistic view of the future wherein humanity had put aside our tribalistic violence towards each other and had moved on to exploring the stars. Humanity had become the main portion of the United Federation of Planets, Starfleet, its exploration and naval branch. And of course, wherever you have big spaceships, someone's going to go, I wonder if I can make a game out of that. And so, after the release of Star Trek the Motion Picture, in 1979, a game company called Task Force Games got a license from Paramount. The license was extremely limited. They were allowed to use the Franz Josef Starfleet Technical Manual. They were allowed to use images and ships from the original series. But they were not allowed to use anything past that. They were also not allowed to actually refer to or pull events from anything that happened in the original series, the animated series, the movies, or any of the future series. This led to some very interesting issues with a license this restricted. This meant they could not do what most people would have done. And so they improvised. The first edition of Starfleet Battles was what they called the Pocket Edition. This was designed to all fit into a large Ziploc bag. Easy portability, easy to carry, easy to set up. And the game focused on a two-player game, each player running one ship in effectively starship duels. Now, this really did fit the aesthetic of the original series. The few instances where you saw other ships, other than the Enterprise, it was generally one ship versus one ship. But there was a bit more to it than that. The game was extremely complicated for each ship. You had to track your power allocation. You had to track how much power you had available. You had to track damage to your shields, damage to subsystems. And then you had to deal with a unique, at the time, setup for how you would determine who went when. See, most games are a I go, you go setup. Not Starfleet Battles. They used what was called the impulse setup. Each turn, each game round, was divided into 32 impulses. You would set your ship's speed at the beginning of the round. And then that would determine on what impulses your ship moved and how far it moved on each of those impulses. From that, you also had to record what you were shooting secretly. And then both players would reveal simultaneously what weapons they were shooting at where. And this led to an interesting play setup. This also made it so that running more than one ship is something that is considered a challenge at best. But the system isn't really what's intriguing about Starfleet Battles. Starfleet Battles is a setting all its own. They actually call it the Starfleet universe. Now, in it we have the familiar ships of the Klingons, the Romulans, the Federation. We have more ships of the Orions and the Gorn. But then we have a whole bunch of other stuff that is completely different. Again, this is because of how the licensing was. Task Force Games could not use stuff from the original series, could not reference canon. And so they started expanding the universe on their own, in their own unique ways. In canon Star Trek, the period around the old series and a bit beyond that was a Cold War with the Klingons. Starfleet Battles universe, it was not a Cold War. It was an 18-year-long massive war called the General War. On one side, you had the Klingons, the Romulans, and the Lyran Star Empire. On the other side, you had the Federation, the Hydrans, the Kzinti. Yes, you heard that right. The Kzinti. There's some slight differences between them and Larry Niven's Kzinti, but it's still enough that, yeah, they got a license to use the name and tiger people. But, that's how IPs work. And then you kind of, with the Federation, have the Tholians. But the Tholians are more of a, hey, we don't like these other guys. We don't like you much either, but you know what? We're not going to kill you today. We're not more than these guys. So, and that was the sort of war we were dealing with. And that was a massive war. And again, Starfleet in this universe are not scientists, explorers, and diplomats. Starfleet in this universe is a militarized Starfleet. The Franz Joseph Dreadnought? Yeah, those are out there. They've got bigger ships. They actually have a Federation battleship, which has 4 nacelles. The standard 2 on the sub-hull, secondary hull, and then 2 on the saucer. Because that gives it a lot of power in this system. Now, combine this with one of the other great changes between the settings. And that is, in this system, fighters are a thing. And fighters are predominantly seen among the Romulans and the Lyran Star Empire. Oh gods, do the Lyrans love their fighters. The Lyran Heavy Carrier has twice as many fighters as the next biggest heavy carrier. Yeah, you don't mess with their fighters. Combine this with the whole idea of combat drones, which, by the way, the Klingons loved. And of course, so did the Romulans, because the Romulans had a bunch of Klingon ships. Yeah. The factions were very distinct. More so, in some ways, than we've seen them in canon Trek games. But the setting never really stopped evolving for Starfleet Battles. They actually, with their captain's logs, push the setting forward slightly. They reveal new ships, they tell new stories about the setting. It's constantly evolving. They've gotten some new areas of their own as well. There's stuff in the Magellanic Clouds. There's factions within those that are warring with each other. There's a section on what's called the Omega Octant, which is a octant away from where all the main action is. And it's got its own stories and focus going on there. And they just keep evolving this. And you've ended up with a setting that it looks, on a first glance, like the old series era of Star Trek. But when you start peeling back the paint, peeling back the layers, you find that you're not dealing with that universe at all. You're dealing with something so different that it's actually fascinating how it evolved differently. You know, when you're talking about a militarized Starfleet, when you're talking about only Romulans having cloaking devices, when you're talking about Klingon ships having phasers, but also having disruptors on the ends of their wings. Things get interesting, just in terms of how different the setting is. And that's where things are always going to be. Because the license dictates what Task Force Games originally, and now, since 1993, the Amarillo Design Bureau can do. And this is why I felt this game needed to be talked about. Because this is one of those fascinating instances where IP licensing leads to something that transcends the original source material from where it was. Now, I thank you for your time. If you like this, please click like or subscribe down below. I will include a link to the Amarillo Design Bureau down in the discussion below. And I will talk to you all next week when I will be discussing one of the more controversial RPGs of its day and its most recent edition, Cult Divinity Lost. See you next week. Keep gaming. Have fun over the holidays.